impacts on fashion is something that if you're in the orthodoxy of the fashion industry, you're less aware of, but obviously anyone looking at it through the sustainability lenses has a much more heightened awareness of. And then I've got Bethany, who's, well, I worked for a woman called Sharon Hodgson in Westminster, who was my mentor, and then she offered me a job. And she has led on something called Holiday Hunger and School Food, and trying to get free school meals for all children, because she's very aware of hunger poverty, of the growth in people, the growth in the rising numbers of food bank users. And when I read about Bethany's work, actually Charlotte, who's here sorting out the tech with Frederic, sent me your work, and I was like, oh, there's such a link here between what Sharon's doing and what I was advocating for how I got asked to meet the Felix Project and put them into Westminster. Because to me it seems absolutely twisted that apparently with food waste we could fill Wembley Stadium something like 12 times a year, but we've got such poverty in terms of food, which is impacting on health and food bag usage, which people, because of declining incomes, can't actually afford to put anything into. It's horrendous. So I thought it was all power to you. I think it's amazing that somebody who's starting out is preparing to give away some of their profits to charity, because it's almost like we come full circle in terms of redistribution and trying to give back. I thought it was amazing. And then Richard I met when Sarah Lower, who is one of the leading advocates of New Generation and New Designers, had her event at Liberty. And the gremlins are going to sort themselves out. And we had a chat, didn't we, next to you? Remember? We had a chat, I'm very hot, we had a chat about your clothes. You go to India, and you said something about the government in India work with supporting the textile designers and the architects.
Yeah, so basically the place that I work with is in Tamil Nadu in the south, and it's more specifically E-Road. And I had come out of consulting for some brands in Paris where I worked before, and then started consulting for this mainly like a denim and linen brand there. But then I was introduced to all these weavers that they're working with who are making amazing textiles for them, quite practical though, not like, not really pushing it. And especially it's a shame that they have the skills, they're quite ancient skills in terms of making jackets and stuff. But the government basically come in and sponsor their weaves, so they give them a bursary for the weaves. And through that they get, I think it's like it works out at like quadruple the fair trade wage, so it's like a luxury job that these women, it's like specifically women have. And then they've created a community whereby they can get education and have access to traineeships and also to further education as well. So it's like it's a very circular thing. Yeah, it is, and that's why I think it's kind of so important for me to keep working with them.
Yeah, thank you. Then I've got Ursula to my left, who I met when you were heading up Aesthetica, and my friend Jessie Brinton, who's an amazing writer who's meant to be coming, was writing for you, and I wrote a piece about Noki, who's been an old friend of mine from way back when. And now you head up Fashion Revolution, and the Who Made My Clothes campaign, which is only, 5 years old? Has just been a global phenomenon, because I think what's important about it gives visibility to the invisible. It gives identity and value to the people who have been less valued by a supply chain where the cost of the clothes has been lowered at the expense of the workers. Then we've got Daniel, who heads up, is the founder of the Commonwealth Fashion Council. Last week we did an event at the Houses of Parliament on Commonwealth fashion, because with me looking through the lens of Brexit, it's important to advocate other opportunities. And we had a full roster, didn't we? And it was an all singing, all dancing talent and opportunities. We had people from CII, and we had Oswald Boateng speaking. And actually today, the MP who chairs that all-party group has asked for a meeting with one of the ministers to discuss our concerns, and that's the first time I think in over a year that fashion has been raised, so all power to us. And then at the end I have Christina, who works at the Sustainable Angle, and works in really bringing the textiles, bringing designers to the textiles, which I think links in with Richard. You met the textile designers, but other people might not have the time or the resources, so I just wanted to bring everyone together. So Anna, can I just start with you?
Yeah, I'm just going to chat very briefly a little bit about the questions that we put together on the survey for Fashion Roundtable, and a little bit about Centre for Sustainable Fashion's approach to sustainability. I mean, if you want to ask me anything or me to talk about one thing over the other, then I will, but they all sort of interlink, obviously. Can I follow it? No. You can hear me though, right?
Yeah, it's just
Oh, got the recording.
Yeah, I think it's okay.
Okay, fine. So I'll just go through the questions really quickly, and people can give me feedback, or if you could answer the questions later, it'd be amazing. I think that it's always a process of learning and shaping what sustainability is, because it means different things to different people all the time, and often it can put people off if it's just about a set of rules. So that's why we made the questions, to find out what other people think, people from brands, designers, big, small, consumers, students. I mean, obviously we have multiple identities anyway, we're not just one thing. So that's why we wanted to sort of discover what people's ideas around sustainability were. Were they really concerned with the environmental impact, the social impact, the loss of cultural heritage, lack of economic sustainability? There are the sort of 4 pillars of sustainability that all come together to make a holistic approach to sustainability, but some people value one of them more than the other, or some of them speak a lot to people. For me, I think sustainability is about social justice, about diversity, about redistribution, as well as, I mean, they're the things that I'm really interested in, not at the expense of the environmental sustainability, but I think they've got to go hand in hand, because they're so interconnected, and the interconnected nature of it is sometimes lost, or turns, you know, like if people just focus on one area, sometimes it can be alienating. So I'm really interested in finding out what it is that people value that makes them interesting, that's a way to get them to engage, and then engaging in sustainability to me is a sort of political engagement. And
exactly, because after what we want to do is exactly what we've done with the Brexit report, and what we're aiming to do with the ethnic representation report, survey that we've put together, is that these become documents which then give us data, which then become a lobbying platform, which is why it becomes so important. Because otherwise it's a feeling, and then it becomes data.
And we want to know what we should be lobbying for. I mean, it's fine to lobby for something that
we care about.
Yeah, one person likes, but it's such a interconnecting topic that it's really important. And if we don't see Brexit as an opportunity, despite all the depressing things about it, it's got to be an opportunity for new ways and discussions going forward. Like how, well, this is like my opinion, but how do we get a discussion around social justice, representation as part of a sustainability or a part of the fashion industry going forward, as well as ideas about recycling, limits on resource use, discussions around resources, and all of that at the same time.
Because I mean, I've just spoken to Anna about this. It's not for want of trying that this panel's all white, and I think this goes to the heart of the intersectionality that has to come into the sustainable fashion conversation. I mean, one woman I spoke to is doing sourcing, she's in Kenya, I couldn't find her. Another guy I spoke to is in Porto, and he was at the event at the Houses of Parliament last week. And I'm sure my networks aren't everybody, but I do try my hardest to make sure that we represent, because that's very important to me. So I think that that's also a conversation that sustainability
needs to have. It's a massive conversation, and an important one, and it all will only add to the ideas around sustainability, enrich it when people bring in their different approaches and ideas, and make it less sort of top-down, which is sometimes part of the problem when it comes to engaging people. Although working with students, I find now that engaging people is less difficult than it was 10 years ago. So the Centre for Sustainable Fashion started in 2008. When we first started, there was just 3 of us, and people were not interested. I mean, not like Ursula, she was already like flying the flag, but at LCF, it was hard to get people to talk about it, and still now people are joking about us, you know, like, oh yeah. But it's definitely, it's definitely changed. It's nowhere near like that. But students are already so much further on the journey of sustainability and thinking, now they challenge us, they come and say, yeah, but we've already thought about that like 5 years ago, and they're like, all right, okay, sorry, move on, that's not where we're going to go. So we've always got to keep learning from everyone. So I won't go through every single question,
but we'd love you to answer the questions.
But please do,
and opt into our membership.
Because the more information we can find, the better the conversation can be.
Yeah, because that's how the all-party group can lobby, because they then have data that they can use, which creates a conversation and a narrative. Not only can we use it, for instance, even the Mail on Sunday used our Brexit paper, and they're actually a Remain paper, which I didn't know beforehand. So, we're trying to tap into mainstream media and not just the silo, because I think that's at the heart of these issues. So what would you say would be your core takeaways that we would like to see from the survey? What would you like? Obviously data, information, but what would you like us to do with it when we've got it? Would you like to see incremental changes in terms of modern day slavery, which Lola's dealing with?
So Lola's putting an amendment onto the Modern Day Slavery Act, which is, I don't know the details, but the Modern Day Slavery Act has obviously already become legislation, but it went through in 2015 and needs potentially more teeth.
Because the worry is that when we leave the EU, we could incrementally start to take away some of the safeguards that the EU has in place. They won't be taken away. We will take those laws into UK government law, but incrementally down the line they could be altered. That's the concern, isn't it?
Yeah. And things like the modern day slavery is just a start, so we need to just keep building on it to make it have more.
Because I don't know if anyone's aware, but in the Financial Times last week there was an article about workers in Leicester who are working for half the legal payment per hour. They're working at under £4 an hour in our own country. So, there's many issues around this. And what do you think we can do to create a more inclusive sustainability agenda? That we're working with the high street from, the pound shops, the Morrisons. What can we do to it?
That we need to engage everyone to change, but we also need to culturally change ideas around value, around what success looks like, around ideas about growth, about how much things need to grow. I mean, infinite growth isn't an impossibility, right? We cannot there's not enough stuff, resources to keep growing, so the conversation's bigger than fashion. The conversation's about how much is enough, what a sustainable business looks like that can maintain creative livelihoods, but not just talk about financial
and
profit.
Have DEFRA, which is the Department of the Environment, Fishing and Agriculture, have they been in to see the Centre for Sustainable Fashion too?
The A started the Sustainable Fashion Roadmap.
Yeah, so that was in 2010, 2008.
No.
A long time ago though.
Yeah.
Okay, but they have
stopped it.
Okay. Yeah, okay, I'll get onto this guy Lee. It's the lady who was there's called Dorothy Maxwell.
She's the one who
yes.
she's Helen Fraser.
Yes, I know. I'm a detective.
I mean, that started a long time ago.
But they're off the pedal, would you feel? We need to kind of reinvigorate.
I think there needs to be, I don't know how that was, the conversation's changed already a lot, largely through education at places like LCF, UAL, graduates, things like Fashion Revolution, Aesthetica even, I mean, I know, but without Aesthetica that changed everything in that time period. I'm just writing a publication about the last 10 years of sustainability in fashion, like mapping out how conversations have changed from, the normal conversation about lentils and hemp to much more political conversations about power, distribution, transparency, equity, colonialism, racism. I mean, it's moved on so much to be so much meatier and juicier, and ideas about growth and things like that. I mean, it's so exciting that there's opportunity to talk about organising things in a totally different way.
Mm-hmm.
If we can get enough people in to do it in a way that I think, well, not I think, that is just. I mean, I'm not the arbiter of what is just, but in a just way. It'd be so great.
So I think why this could be powerful if we can get enough data for the survey is because look at what's happened with single-usage plastic. You know, Michael Gove has got behind that. He's a very coherent politician, whatever you think of his politics, and he's using that issue. He's put himself back on the map. And, you know, everybody's decided to get rid of plastic straws and single-use plastic. So it's about framing the narrative so that when we can use it, so we can get a support for whatever it is, that is the, you know, the consensus feels is the most important. Because for me, it's the social aspects of sustainability and the environmental aspects are important, but for me they're second to the workers.
Or they're so linked.
But everybody's different. Okay, thank you. And then let's go over to Bethany. Bethany, would you like to talk about why you developed
a collection called Breadline and what the thinking and the methodology behind that was?
With the collection, I really wanted to address food poverty in the UK. So I was volunteering there and
at Vauxhall.
At Vauxhall Food Bank, and kind of seeing who was coming in, and it was like mum, or families that are actually working, no matter like what the politicians were saying at the time. And I really wanted to address how difficult it is to actually access a food bank. And so you need, you can only have 3 vouchers every 6 months, and the voucher has to come from either a doctor, a social worker, or the job centre. So they're actually really difficult, and that's only 3 days worth of emergency food. So the Vauxhall Food Bank's different in that it supplies a hot breakfast while you wait for your food parcel. So I wanted to set up kind of a cycle of exchange. So I approached Tesco's for waste. Fresh fruit and veg, which I'd hand out in parcels in exchange for denim or knitwear that I specified in to bring back. So you could bring in a pair of old jeans and get like a food parcel in exchange, but of like fresh fruit and veg rather than non-perishable.
Because that is a big issue with food banks, isn't it? It can be like pasta and rice and no fruit and veg.
Yeah, and also everything's non-perishable, so milk, especially if you go in and, someone going in who's vegan, it's like really difficult. So I kind of set up that exchange, and then I took the materials and made them into a new collection, and then donate 30% of the profits back to the food bank. And then Tesco's gave me their cardboard, which I made into a new material through basket weaving. So it's like a new leather. And then I worked with all like British craftsmen and women, embroidery. So it's all hand processes, hand knitting, hand embroidery. So it's all like handmade collection using all local. And using all recycled organic components apart from top stitch, because I can't actually get it.
So on the make, but how did you make cardboard into leather?
So it was quite...
That's amazing.
It was really difficult. So the cardboard has to be separated because it's 3 layers. And so you can separate it in water because it dissolves the glue. So I had a big paddling pool in my garden at the time, and I'd like place the cardboard in, and then a board would like slide under it, and then that would be then dried, fused to organic cotton, and then it's laser cut and then basket woven. But then I developed a seaming technique, which like through laser cutting, which made them seamless, so they would weave into each other, and then the adhesive would then reheat with a heat press. Wow. So it was quite complicated.
So it's very labour intensive.
Yeah, exactly. But then I've kind of like, with moving on, I'm now doing like recycled materials, but using hand looms. And I've been working with San Patriano in Italy. So
what's San Patriano?
So it's a drug rehabilitation centre, but it's a non-for-profit, and they produce handcrafted items. So it can be from organic cheese down to hand-painted wallpaper. So they're like working with Jeff Koons on a project with that. And then I work with hand-woven textiles. So it's very like bespoke. So they kind of are working with like Vivienne Westwood, Dior, Chanel. So it's all hand-woven, but I work with waste and then also donated yarns from other factories from across Italy, and then we produce the hand-woven fabrics there. So I work with them, and I also work with the Making for Change project of London College of Fashion. So that's in Downview Prison, so it's teaching the women level 1 and level 2 machinist skills. It teaches those skills, and they do production through there. So I do all of my jersey production with the women, and then I donate 20% of the collection back to the women. So it's kind of like menswear, but supporting women in vulnerable situations.
Wow.
So.
Anyone else? Wow.
Bethany, I didn't know the half about you. I knew about the food banks. This is
yeah.
I don't know if this is on. Is this on, Frederic? It doesn't feel like it's on.
I'm recording as well, so it's not.
Okay, so
Yeah.
So when I was in Westminster, I was going to lots of events talking about what's going on in the prisons.
Yeah.
And they would be talking in quite highfalutin terms, and in the same time we were seeing high suicide rates. So nurturing support to do training to go back into the workplace.
Yeah, but women, I think, make up 4% of the prison population. So it's really like there needs to be more training or program and support for women in prison, because they are the minority, and then they're left, they're not fought after. So it's a really important thing for me anyway to work with the program, and to see how the products that they're producing are like really amazing. So it's a really good.
And what to you would be sustainable growth for your business? What would that mean?
So I just sell to 4 stores at the minute, and I'm trying to do consultancy and lecturing to kind of like help support my cash flow. But I'm fine. Yeah, I think it's difficult with store and doing wholesale, and I'm trying to kind of like get my head around that, because I kind of think I do have to operate that way in one hand, but it's kind of working out what the balance is. And then so it's difficult.
There's a need for more than niche sustainable fashion shops. There's a need for an integrated support for how we can consume it. Even I was talking to Push here, like there's no PR for sustainable fashion that as a stylist you can go, I know that they've got it.
Yeah.
Make your life a lot easier, because otherwise you have to navigate and read the terms and work it out.
Yeah, definitely.
So for you to grow, maybe there needs to be support rather than just niche boutiques, but
like a research grant or something. You know what I mean? Like that's actually what you need, because it's the
because you're doing a lot of like this cardboard research, situation. This
Like I just started on a project with Ursula and the British Council. So then we're doing a project in India. So that I'm really excited about that project, because it's to do with weaving and working, with Crafting Futures project for the British Council and Fashion Revolution. So that's
integrated.
Yeah, so that's exciting. But I think I need to work out how I can access funding to support research.
The age old. Thank you very much, Bethany. And then Richard, what are we going to talk about? What do you want to talk about? And also, Richard's going over to Ireland. I think this is something important to say, because I've been watching your work. You've integrated your politics into your work in a really interesting way, which for someone like me who's very political, it feels very resonant for me to see what you've been doing at Selfridges and with Gareth Pugh as well.
Yeah, well, Gareth was, about the political thing, Gareth was super supportive, and I think they invited me to take over the window of Selfridges, and there's this referendum on Friday that we've kind of been fighting for about 6 years in Ireland, because in Ireland abortion in any case is basically illegal. So even if you have a fatal abnormality, or you're raped, which is quite common, you can't have an abortion or you can't access one in the country. So that makes, only in really exceptional cases, so that makes it a problem that we also don't have NHS. So basically,
Oh, you don't?
there's no NHS in Ireland, no, not at all. So, yeah. So even if you were like which in a lot of cases like teenagers who are the people who need it most, or like young women who are starting out in their careers, and in order to come to England and make kind of use of what you have over here, it costs about €3,000, because you can't access NHS unless you've lived in London. It's quite like a modern problem, but super, super repressive, and that's when I did the Selfridges thing. It caused a lot of drama with Selfridges, but you know, whatever. It is good, and also like I was, you know, whatever. I literally said to them, like, blame it on me. It's fine. It's like my cause, whatever. It's nothing to do with you. And then getting someone to support the letter I wrote was actually quite hard, because it was supposed to go in, you know, Guardian, it was supposed to go in this, and then Vogue were the one, like New Vogue were the ones that actually supported it. So that was really good, and also to spell it out, because a lot of men haven't spoken about as a problem, because it doesn't just affect women. You know, it's literally is a human rights issue, and it's happening to 50% of the population where I'm from. So I just thought it was really important. Yeah.
And why do you? Because I think for me it feels very rare. Although a lot of people talk about their politics, what you've done is you've really integrated it into your work. And do you feel that you're part of a new generation, or do you feel that it's where are you at with that?
I think so. I mean, I think with the new generation thing, there's such a change that I noticed when I came out of St. Martin's, because we were the last year to graduate the old building, and also the last year to pay the old fees. So personally for me, because I'm from a working class background, I couldn't afford those kind of fees. And when I went to the bank to get a loan to pay for 1 year of fees, because you need to live in England for I think 18 months before you get student loan. So the first year I had to pay for it, and because I had no assets or my family had no savings, the largest amount of money I could borrow was €3,000, and that covered the first year. And if I went now, it's still the same case, you know. So if I asked for 9,000, that couldn't happen. Right. So that's when we were really involved in the protests and stuff in Trafalgar Square, that, you know, nothing really happened. You know, nothing's changed. So I do think it's isolated a whole sector of society who would be applying to St. Martin's. And when we went there was such a demographic. If you talk about diversity, people were literally from everywhere. And getting in was like X Factor, you know, there was like 60 people every hour, and then they picked 3, and then, you know, it was like bizarre. They put lists on doors and getting eliminated. It was so strange. And then now it's just, I lectured there, so I went back a few times, and I'm just like, everyone's swanning about with a fucking Vegemite jacket on. I'm like, who paid for that? Like, you know, that shit happened, and, you know, you've been rinsed by the other students, but it's like it's a different culture of creation. And I feel like our generation, as we came out, we were saying no to big job opportunities, and, you know,
why were you saying no?
I don't know, because for me personally, I did a project with Louis Vuitton in my second year, and they really liked the project. They all came over, the creative director, blah, 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 and they said, oh, we'd like to offer you a job, so can you take a year out and come and work for us, and then see where we go from there. I did that, and by the end of it, they're just seeing the operation behind the biggest luxury brand on the planet is just, it's another level of, and I was so uncomfortable working there, and even, you know, with Matty Bowen worked at Vuitton for a while, left as well. And it's just like, I think when you're taught, you're very much taught in art school, and you make stuff from absolutely nothing. Then you go to one of these luxury brands and you realise the kind of psyche and the marketing behind fashion, and how far they'll go to protect an image or an identity, and it's just like blew my mind. I was like, you can have that contract. You know.
I mean, that's very brave of you, but you're right. If you go back to student debt, that's a harder decision and a harder choice to make.
Yeah, and also when you speak to these companies, you know, and a lot of them I've worked with some more since, just on consulting, because I didn't want to take a full-time job, and their solution is, if you say no, they're like, here's 10 grand, here's 10 more grand. You know, like, it's literally like, we're going to get you, you're taking the job, and that you don't really feel like you have a choice when you're like 24, and they're like, wouldn't it be great to be a director of something at Vuitton? And you're like,
I mean, on the level, it is the dream of a lot of people.
Yeah.
And all power to them for wanting that.
Yeah.
But maybe it's not for everybody.
Yeah, I think so. And then I think it's just realising we're not really trained on what those jobs entail, I think, you know, and what it actually is to be a designer of a luxury house.
So actually, if you move the conversation about sustainability, arguably having to do pre-fall, ready-to-wear, couture, men's, cruise,
bag lunches,
children,
everything, yeah.
accessories, is an unsustainable business model for one.
Completely, yeah. And also you see, like, you know, you see these massive shows and runway shows every 3 months now. I never see anyone wearing those clothes. And even seeing the stats come back, nobody buys those clothes because they apply the same profit margin to clothes as they do to bags where they make a killing, you know, like it's like, it could be 15, 20 times the markup.
But
So.
then the clothes are the vastly different brands by the lipstick, aren't they?
Exactly, yeah. So it's like this weird, really old-fashioned cycle that I think I really wanted to isolate myself from as soon as
So what
possible.
would a new business model for you, or do you feel you're doing that within your own work?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when I graduated, I was lucky to get 2 of the good like awards at the press show. So I had the opportunity to say no, and I actually originally was going to apply to the Royal Academy to do sculpture because my background was sculpture before I went to St. Martin's. None of my projects were really fashion until my final collection. And then I was like, oh no, I'll run with this while I'm here. And it just kind of happened. I was approached by a lot of people. A store in Ireland bought Brown Thomas, which is part of the Selfridges Group, bought my whole graduate collection. And then I was introduced to all these private clients, so I was doing it privately for a while before I was introduced to Lulu Kennedy, who offered me Fashion East. But it was always like really auditioned, you know, because I made a lot of it myself, like physically sewed it and all that. So it was always like, I always had it limited. At the beginning it was like 3 pieces, and then it went to like 12, and then we were introduced to wholesaling, which I didn't like, so I kind of reined that in a bit because it grew too quickly.
Why did you like wholesaling?
There was so much of it, and it wasn't the business that I wanted it to become. Like I got a lot from working with these women who were, you know, ordering from me and learning about what they buy, and you know, just making one piece is it's like a nice conversation, and you learn so much from like learning what women actually need clothes for, and they're like, you know, they have these massive jobs, but they're also like, I've got a 4-year-old, I need to be able to throw that in the fucking washing machine, and then I need to be able to get it in a dryer and get back in the car, and it's just like those things that a lot of brands don't even consider, you know. So that's really informed my process of design, and I was being inspired by the women who I'm around. Like even my mum just like works in Argos, but her, like, you'd have certain practicalities that relate to everyone, you know. So I think that's always informed how I design. Yeah.
And how, I don't know if this is working, but how did you get to India?
I had stopped work. I was doing some consulting at Versace, and then I got into another country.
You said it right. I can't say it right often.
And then I went to Shadi had set up these looms, and it was like amazing to see. But then I was having conversations with these women, and they had these skills that are really ancient, like old hand looming skills, and I had
cross-generational.
Really, yeah, and like you can only really get trained by being trained by someone you know, I think. So it is like family member to family member to family member. And then the government have come in and obviously been like, all of these brands have really, if you go to southern India, it's like horrific what you see, what those companies have done to the coast. Like you can't swim in the sea, you know, kids are working from when they're like 4, and I'm sure younger, that's just what I experienced. And then I went to some factories just to do some research, and there's one machine produces like 100,000 meters of fabric for Zara a week, and that's one machine, and you're just like, where does it go? And a lot of it's kind of there, or they present it to like skips. I think they're in the sea in China and stuff. It's like all of these bizarre things that I was learning about, and I was like, wow. And it's not luxury, you know. That's not what luxury is. No, and it's complete. Like, and I think a lot of it comes down to education, because we're never actually taught that from a young age, and that's where I think you pick up your interests. You know, like if you learned that that's how close. Like it takes 2 hours to make a shirt, you'd understand. You'd be like, why am I paying €10 for something that took 2 hours to make? Like, how does that logically add up? Someone's losing out. So, you know, just that logic being spelled out to people, I think, is really helpful. And that's what, like, with the clothes that I make, they have hand-woven stuff. It has like a code of the weaver, and then my name, because I designed the fabric, and then you can trace it back to who actually wove it. So there's always like an archive that's ongoing, and it's kind of an experimentation as well. The first time I did it, I just did an entirely hand-woven collection. I was like, oh god, everyone's going to hate this, but I really liked it. So.
And they did love it.
Yeah, it went really well.
How did it do for you in Liberties when you were in there?
Great, yeah. There's lots of reorders, and people really respond to it, I think. And because there's a bit of education when you buy it, it comes with where it's from, how it's produced, like how it's not wasteful. There's only 5 of them. This is one of them. You know, it's that kind of just letting people know how it got there on the hanger. I think is quite important, because everything has a journey and a life cycle that people don't realise, and it should be expensive. You know, there's so much work in it from everyone involved.
And what conversations do you think that you, as a designer who's at this end, could have with the high street or the bigger brands, so that they could join up there thinking about what they're doing, given the the waste. What is fashion's second biggest waste?
After oil, isn't it? Yeah.
No, that's not a correct statistic.
What is the correct one?
There isn't a number anymore, but it's certainly not the second. It's hovering around the fifth and the fourth.
Okay, so it's got better or it?
No, it was used wrong.
It was used wrong. Okay.
There isn't basically. I mean, it's still pretty polluted,
Yes.
but no longer the second. It was just a statistic that was unsubstantiated.
Yeah. Thank you.
I don't know.
What do we do? Thank you also. What would we do to change what you know, because you've rejected working at a bigger house,
Yeah.
which is a brave move.
Yeah.
But the high street for me as well, we also have to have a conversation for it to have any resonance.
Yeah,
because
for
the
sure.
volumes are there. So what can we do?
There's something quite obvious though, because I mean, as I've only been going for 2 years really, and the demand for what I do is growing so much that I'm finding it hard to, keep up with it, and everyone who works with me is finding it hard to keep up with it. But it's quite restricted as well, whereas with the high street, people are losing interest every day. And the same with luxury brands, there's only so many people who want that Vuitton bag, and eventually you're going to think of something else, so I don't know, it's obvious things like that. And also the education thing, I think that's really important to younger people who are buying clothes now. I mean, I'm by no means a luxury customer, but if I was buying something, I'd want to know where it's from, and it's just because things are a bit more transparent now, even with social media, which kind of freaks me out, but you can access information so rapidly that if they don't kind of pick up on that, I think they'll lose out even more.
So perhaps it's how to frame the fact that clothes are having to be burned or thrown into waste, so that although profit margins are scaled in one way, they're also being framed in, I'm now holding back, they're also being framed, I hope my tummy doesn't rumble, they're now being framed in the waste is there, so the price is there, so the circle, we need to shift the circle. That's really helpful and really interesting. I feel really encouraged by you two as designers, because your conversations and your depth of knowledge and your wanting. The first designer I ever styled for was Sarah Ratty, who had a brand called Conscious Earthwear, and I had a jacket. We were ex-ravers together and had a jacket that was made by plastic bottles, and then she's been in the V&A and in the.
That's what I just used as plastic bottles.
Yeah.
As well. It's where they use
and bamboo and it was all really radical. It's really encouraging to see that these conversations are getting larger. So Ursula is here, who's the font of all knowledge on transparency, really, and I think we can just leave it over to you.
Oh, really? Give me a start.
So I've heard you say this before, but other people here might not have. You went from aesthetica to fashion revolution, and it was based around the tragedy in Bangladesh. Yeah. And you've grown this in 5 years, which to me seems incredible. You've got initiatives. I've got the Moroccan fashion revolution following Fashion Roundtable. I think I've got one in New Zealand, one in Australia. They seem to be everywhere. You've done amazing.
New Zealand and Australia is there. Hey, as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have volunteers in nearly 100 countries. In fact, it's maybe over 100 countries. We started as a result of the Rana Plaza disaster, and we've grown to become, we're now the biggest fashion activism movement in the world. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of numbers, this Fashion Revolution Week, we grew in certain areas by 35%, in others by 75%. And our reach was over 250 million. There were something like 173,000 posts just on Instagram, and over nearly 2,000 articles globally during Fashion Revolution Week. So that's the scale of it. It's huge. And I guess the loveliest thing is that the one that grew the most this year by 65% was the I Made Your Clothes hashtag. So we started as a result of the Rana Plaza. My background is not at all in the social aspect. Actually, it's in the environmental one. I had a label for many years. We were the first to use pre- and post-consumer waste. We upcycled at scale. And then, as you said, and other people have said, I was the founder and curator of Aesthetica, which was the sustainable fashion area for the British Fashion Council at London Fashion Week, and we launched, Christopher Rayburn, Beja, and several other designers were born there. And when Rana Plaza happened, it was just like, enough, enough.
So the figure is 1,138 people
Yes,
died,
it is.
but there were also many thousands injured as well, right?
I think the figures is, I think it's 2,500 injured. I think what's most shocking is that 90% were young girls. Young girls, probably 20, 24, who will never work again. I mean, the ones that are dead, their families, and the ones that will never work again. And I think that the thing that really, really, really freaked me out was that genuinely brands didn't know whether they were or weren't producing there. There were only a handful of brands that could just put their hand up and say, yeah, I was producing there, forgive me, I'm sorry, I was a part of this tragedy. But there were others going around, calling their sourcing managers and literally checking the bloody rubble for labels. Were we there? And I mean, that is beyond repellent. And this isn't to say that transparency right now is the one solution, because it's not. But as you heard from everybody else, we are at that point at which the fashion industry is changing, because the culture is changing, and transparency is the first step to the change of that culture. So the fashion industry is an industry that starts exploitative and develops exploitative, so it starts with slaves picking cotton and sweatshops in Victoria.
You're talking about in America in the 19th century, is that when you
yes,
right?
I mean, there's
the history
of the absolutely, and it develops into an industry that is all about closed doors, elitism, inefficiency. The supply chain is completely inefficient, and we are breaking that barrier and challenging that culture. We know that when there is secrecy, a supply chain that's built on secrecy, we are going to get human rights abuses and environmental abuses. As we know that when we have a fashion industry that is built on elitism, we are going to think that lack of respect, the disrespect for diversity and stigma, they're acceptable. And all that needs to change. It's not my dress is better than yours, it's not my friends are better than yours. This is a culture where we only respect the top. If you only respect the top, how are you going to deal with the millions at the bottom? And those are the ones that are making our clothes.
Well, also, I mean, my thinking through the Fashion Roundtable lens is ultimately they're the consumer, so we've got to respect the consumer, which has been part of the narrative that we've put through here. Is that
the consumer's been ripped off left, right, and centre, because we've had it here. We're buying either 5 t-shirts for the price of one at a £5, or we are buying a it bag for 3,000 euros that was made for 12. So we've all been ripped off, and it really is about bringing it back to, I mean, I don't like the term ethical or sustainable fashion, but I think just fashion, and you can look at the word just in both ways in this case. But the reality is that we have an opportunity. First of all, none of us is a consumer, because to consume it means to wear out. And we don't wear out because we produce 53 million tons of clothing, and we chuck in the landfill or incineration 78% of that. So who's consuming? We're just throwing things out. And the reality is that we really do have an opportunity to turn this around if we think a little bit more intelligently about the clothes that we wear. Another thing to remember, I guess, it's that we talk about supply chain. That's not some kind of la-la land far away from you. Each and every one of your wardrobe is in the fashion supply chain. It's at some point 3/4 of the way between something being produced, the cotton seed being found, whatever, and stuff being thrown away. So every morning you wake up, open your wardrobe, and hey, presto, there is something that you can do about it yourself. But it is, fashion is brilliantly cyclical and predictable, quite as, predictable industry. And I feel that, a lot of people have asked me, is sustainable fashion a trend? And my reply is no, it's the other way around. It's cheap fashion that is, because we are going to turn around, look at this period and think, crazy. Just as we look at straws now and think, crazy. You know, think of, you know, pre-distressed denim. You know, what's all that? You know, we can't even be bothered to live our own life.
How do you communicate that in a culture where you've got people who are on or below the breadline, who are having to...
Crap, I don't take that. It's not true. 30p to pay a garment worker a living wage would add to the cost of your t-shirt. It's not about the breadline. You know, it's about the fact that the word democratic and the word aspirational, both, you know, they're the opposite of each other. They both need to apply to the entirety of the supply chain, not the finished product. There is nothing wrong with cheap or fast fashion if the volumes are controlled and the garment workers and the supply chain workers are adequately paid. And it is a question of redistribution, as it is a question of understanding that, you know, maybe I give it to you not in tons, I give it to you in garments. We're producing 150 billion garments of clothing per year. 150 billion garments of clothing. Those are being produced. Think of all of the ones that aren't. You know, think of the waste. Almost for every t-shirt, because they're made cheaply, they're made fast. There's another 3 that gets thrown away. You know, there is the fabrics that's not quite right, not the right shade. You know, and there is no transparency over the provenance of any of those materials. This is why we don't know. You know, every time you buy something that's worthwhile to you, that you love, and that maybe you've saved up for, the brand is throwing something extremely similar because maybe one sleeve was slightly shorter than the other for brand protection, you know, or the factory is throwing away because the brand over-ordered just in case they were going to be selling more, and then whoops, they didn't. You know, so we're looking at a system that's utterly lost control, lost efficiency, but in the meantime is insanely damaging. So the point is that fashion is one of the creative industries. The job of designers is to look for solutions, not to create problems. And we are incredibly lucky right now, and I can tell you because I'm old and I've seen this place for a long time, that things are changing. So I was at Central St. Martin's where I lectured the other day, and year 2s, and I said, do you know about fashion revolution? Yeah. Do you know about transparency? Yeah. Do you know about waste? Mm-hmm. What am I going to tell you then? But we went into the nitty-gritty technique of upcycling and disassembly and sustainable materials and organic, and, you know, so the conversation is getting way, way, way more erudite and articulate, and this generation, who, bless them, they wake up in the morning and they actually don't know whether when they're 80 there is going to be a planet for them to inhabit, have got pepper up their bum. And they're acting, and they're moving, and they're understanding, and they are willing to use their creativity to do something good. You know, the fashion industry is the only bloody industry in the world for whom the word worthy had a bad connotation up until 2 years ago. I mean, hello. And now finally we're seeing a generation that's saying, I want to stay small. There's more designers now starting their own label than there has been since the 80s. And it is because it's something, I don't know how many are refusing, like you did, to go inside the big houses because they fundamentally disagree with those principles, those techniques, and the way that fashion is both made and sold. And so we are, you know, we have to support them all. But Fashion Revolution, we started a couple of years, but we're strengthening a new initiative which is called Fashion Open Studio. And during Fashion Revolution Week, we show fashion the other way around, you know, rather than the catwalk and then, you know, designer at the end, you know, basically the glorification of the finished product and the one person. We want to show the processes and we want to show the people, so the team. And so we do the opposite. We open the doors of the designer's house.
And also you have Tamsin Blanchard, who's a fantastic interviewer and writer, and who's been such a leading advocate for sustainable fashion. I mean, she wrote the book Green is the New Black, over 10 years ago? And she interviews, but she's I had to write an article, and I was writing this article, and I couldn't get it how they wanted it. And I said, Tamsin, I don't know what to do. She switched it in an hour. She's so brilliant with words and with process, and she does a lot of the interviews for you, doesn't she?
Yeah, it's that she's the curator of Fashion Open Studio, so she curates all of the ones that are curated. We're about to launch the ones that are not curated, so slightly more an open call. But we do want to show that there is a different fashion industry being born right now. We do. I mean, to a certain extent, it's what I go back to what you were saying. It is exciting right now because you can invent a new brand, a new technique, a new system, but you can also invent a new way of selling yourself and a new way of bringing your product to market and a different new customer base to reach.
What can we do about, so for instance, you go back to Tesco's and now they sell the wonky looking carrot, or they've got a cheaper range that sells the not quite as fabulous strawberry. Could we ask brands to take those products, but would we have to change the perception that the brand has of itself as being this perfect model if we could have those slightly remaindered seconds pieces?
There's a law being passed in France now that brands can no longer incinerate clothes, they have to donate them to charity. Not that donating to charity is necessarily a good thing these days, because the charities have so much clothes and they don't really know what to do with them themselves, but it is a starting point. What we need to do, there's a lot of talk of circularity, obviously. Closed loop systems, it's going to take a long time before we can effectively close the loop.
So could you just break down what that means to you?
Well, circularity is for instance, right now, if you have cotton, which is pure cotton, you can turn it back into another fibre. It's not quite as good quality as what it was in the first place, but you can. Unfortunately, you can only do it with cotton and wool. And of course, if they've been sewn with polyester, you can't do it. If they've got a zipper, you can't. But it shows you the measure of how we're not there. There's a huge investment in it, but we're not there. But the reality is that we have got to slow down. So
It's just trying to get some air. It's not a good idea for him to speak. Sorry.
Is there any other thing?
Can we just say thank you to Bethany, who's juggling so much? Did we get a photo? Did you take one before she goes? Okay, sorry. Do you want to carry on?
So I as I said, I don't really know what we can do except for really triumph the small ones. Support those ones that have different ideas.
And what exactly, because closed loop, does that mean that everything goes back in on itself? Is it a bit like the Native Americans, the way they used the buffalo and they used every part of the buffalo? Is that what that means?
Not quite. It means that then if they were to take the bone from the buffalo, another buffalo would come out of the bones, pretty much, which is not exactly what they managed. But it is about creating fibre from fibre. Right. So each product is supposed to be designed in a certain way, designed in order to be somehow. But it is, as I said, it's a very, very polyester and cotton, any mixed fibre, those fibres cannot be separated. So you can only effectively downcycle them, so turn them into mattress filling, or anyway, turning them into a material that is of no use to the fashion industry. So closed loop means I take this fabric and I make it into something else that is of equal value. That's recycling. Upcycling is the slightly different process, which I think will become much more popular also in factories in the future, and that is a more immediate creative approach, slower perhaps, more creative, but certainly part of the same family. But again, one of the many solutions that we will have to adopt over the next few years, because otherwise we're going to be drowned in clothes.
So what do you think could be some key pillars that people could take away from here, as well as what we want to do with our survey, so that we've got an advocacy platform? What would be the three or five key takeouts that people could really to understand what we need to do and how we can do it?
Well, when I started Fashion Revolution, the first thing I said to the team is that it's, be curious, find out, do something, and I still stand by that, because at the end of the day, your brain will lead you, your curiosity will take you somewhere, you will know more, and then you will be prompted to do something that's right for you. Fashion is about individualism, so what's right for me, like turning into this mad, raging campaigner, might not be right for you. But the great thing is that, we are all affected by the fashion industry, 100% of us. You may not be interested in fashion, but you have to wear clothes. And therefore, you are inevitably a part of the solution. So, my advice is always, obviously Fashion Revolution is a pretty good place to start, or it seems to have been a pretty good place to start for quite a few, many people.
And before we go to Daniel, I just wanted you to just mention your manifesto, which is very powerful.
Yeah, so please go on www.fashionrevolution.com/manifesto and sign it. It is a manifesto for a fashion revolution. It is also a manifesto that you could rap, dance, perform. It's very poetic. It's how we are. I think Fashion Revolution is a different language when it comes to fashion. It's inclusive, and it is visionary, and it is about today, tomorrow, and forever. And I think that that's what the manifesto feels like to me. It's what fashion looks like when fashion is done right.
So this is Daniel Hatton, and I met Daniel not that long ago, but by God, we've been through some things together.
At New Zealand House.
Yes, I met you at New Zealand House, I think so, I don't remember, anyway.
Been around.
So last week we did an event at the Houses of Parliament for the All-Party Group on sustainable fashion. Was your part of the conversation, but it was on Commonwealth fashion. I think there's very few people who you think, wow, that's incredible that he, basically Daniel managed to get 53 countries to agree to become a part of a council.
Yeah, become accredited as a recognised Commonwealth organisation.
And now that it's happened, I can't quite believe that no one had ever thought of it before, which is what makes it even more extraordinary. Those brilliant ideas, you're like, wow, that's genius.
Yeah, it was just quite an obvious thing for me, really, to do. Obviously, with my love and passion being fashion, I just thought, the Commonwealth can do it in terms of games and bring countries together. Why can't we use that? I'm quite big on using already existing frameworks and network. Why can't we use that framework and network to create a Commonwealth Fashion Council and a wider Commonwealth fashion movement?
So for one of the reasons I wanted us to do that event was because of Brexit, because we have to look for opportunities for business growth because of the implications that a potentially hard Brexit would put to the UK fashion economy. It could be very damaging. We had Selena's here from SA Corporate Finance. They did the algorithm that put in all the input for all of the industry. So it wasn't a bespoke for your company or for your brand, but it was for overall stats for the industry. It would put 38% loss to GDP of a hard Brexit. So obviously we've got to look for other opportunities, which is why, especially given that a lot of the brands are small to medium in this country, over 90%, a lot of the people working in the industry are working in small businesses. That feels to me like a glimmer of opportunity that I think the UK needs to think about. How would you frame it in terms of the differences between the 53 countries and how we here could navigate creating business opportunities? Because I know Kenya, this woman that I'm speaking to, she's going to Kenya this week, and you've mentioned Kenyan Fashion Week. Where do you see the growth opportunities?
I would say one of the most beautiful. I'll give you a little. Do people know what the Commonwealth is and what it actually does? First of all, that's like. It's
101.
So basically, the Commonwealth is a collection of 53 countries across the globe, and those countries fall across most regions. Africa, Europe, the Caribbean, the Pacific,
Canada.
Nations. I'm talking about regions. Sorry. It's okay, but it's a confusion that I have to get over to. What we do is we bring those fashion industries together, fashion weeks and fashion councils, and we create programmes in collaboration with our council members who are fashion weeks and fashion councils. And basically where we see the opportunity lying there is in terms of our cross-regional programmes. So what we do is we bring our council members together through a variety of programmes. So our programmes, give you an example, is 100% Made in the Commonwealth, which is a totally sustainable programme. Basically what we do is we connect fashion designers and artisans and manufacturers together from different regions of the Commonwealth. And they're given a brief and they have to create a product that falls in line with the core principles of the Commonwealth Charter. So the Commonwealth Charter is basically what glues the Commonwealth together. It's what keeps these 53 countries together and highlights values and principles. So these values and principles are, quite fundamental really to the global fashion sector. You've got a commitment to sustainable development, education, which we've been talking about, gender empowerment, freedom of expression, promoting civil societies whereby people can have ideas and thoughts that can actually change the world. And you also have a commitment to youth. Now this is a very important point because the population of the Commonwealth is 2.4 billion people. Now 60% of the population within the Commonwealth are below the age of 30. So in terms of engaging that audience and getting that audience to rewire, we speak about rewiring in the Commonwealth, like to rewire their thought process and how they actually produce goods and how they actually go about thinking. And how they actually go about creating their product is a big thing with us. So what we are as a council is we're a not-for-profit Commonwealth accredited organisation. And we basically facilitate positive change. So that's in a nutshell of the council.
And what would you like to see in terms of integration with British fashion and how we could work?
Mm-hmm. So the Commonwealth is a loosely formed political association, really. And one of our big key areas is to get governments and key decision makers within fashion industries together around the table. So there's the Commonwealth Summit, which happens every 2 years. It's a biannual summit. It
was last month, wasn't
it? It was last month. So 53 governments and their entourages come to the actual summit. Now this for us is a fantastic opportunity because what I'm very big on for the next CHOGM, which is happening. CHOGM stands for the Commonwealth Heads of Government Meeting. Sorry, I'm just with all these abbreviations. So what I'm quite big on getting out there for the next CHOGM, which will be in Rwanda and Kigali, is to try and get governments thinking about cross-regional fashion policies. Mm-hmm. Now, it's all about collective change, and as I said, the Commonwealth has that already existing mechanism there, and that ability to come together through the Commonwealth Charter and their commitment to collective progression. So it's all about using that existing network to try and make governments understand and also to make them more accountable of their fashion industries. But the way they can do that within the Commonwealth is by creating cross-regional fashion policies. In terms of what those policies would look like, that's a completely different conversation, but still the Commonwealth has the ability to rewire the global fashion sector, and that's why I'm quite passionate about the Commonwealth. I always explain the Commonwealth as, a sort of dusty book on top of the shelf that needs to be taken down.
It almost feels like it's being recalibrated, first of all, with I can't say, how do you say it, CHOGM? CHOGM. Last month, completely redefined what's been going on with Windrush. Then obviously Meghan and Harry being the youth, is it the youth ambassadors? I
think they're doing something for they were there for the People's Forum, so I think it's like mostly.
But it's kind of taking the dust off the book, don't you feel? Like it's
making people understand what it is, really. And I think with the Commonwealth, and people automatically think about the historical baggage of the Commonwealth too.
What you mean, colonialism?
Colonialism, yeah. But great things develop and evolve, really, and it isn't about that now. The modern Commonwealth came about in 1947. The greatest things that we see around each other, like in every sphere or aspect, are great things that evolve, really, and adapt, and that can be formed. The modern Commonwealth came into play in 1947. through the Commonwealth Charter and principles. So it's about going back to my first point, about making people understand the value of the Commonwealth and its ability to automatically include people from different regions. That's not something that we actually monitor it within the Commonwealth Fashion Council, but that is already there. So you can start to have discussions about other stuff rather than focusing so much on, is such and such a body here from such and such a place, really. So it's that mechanism again, really.
And where are the exciting places to look at, in your opinion, in the Commonwealth for fashion?
There's a lot of stuff going on in Strancliffe at the moment. Our council member from Colombo Fashion Week, AJ, he's launching a new responsible summit movement. There's also amazing stuff going on in Kenya.
Yeah.
We have been working with the government of Kenya through our accreditation. Because with being accredited, this is another really important thing of the Commonwealth Fashion Council. With being accredited, you have access to governments and they're more willing and able to engage with you, which helps a lot.
And also you said quite candidly that you've won over the spouses, so then you've gone sort of target to re-platform fashion, because sometimes it can be off the agenda, which is what I've noticed here as well.
Yeah, it can be off the agenda, but going back to Kenya, we've been working with the Kenyan government for the past 3 years to launch a Kenyan Fashion Council. There's no fashion council in Kenya. So what we've done is we've gone in there and facilitated, well, there's a number of reasons as to why that never came about, notably fear, really, of one another. But basically the Commonwealth Fashion Council went in there with the backing of the government of Kenya, and we facilitated around about 3 or 4 roundtable discussions and got different stakeholders from the different industries to come together and sit down and talk. So the Commonwealth Fashion Council and the Commonwealth is a great facilitator too.
I think it's very impressive that you've had an idea. You did a college dissertation or something?
Yeah, I went to St Martin's. I was in the same year as I was in the crossover, from Southampton Road to the bank.
But to take an idea and then create an act, it shows.
But it's needed,
determination.
It was frustration really that the Commonwealth isn't doing more within the creative industries really, and it was, as I said, with the government and the accreditation, and it's all these key aspects that are vital ingredients really if we want to sort of go forward collectively.
Thank you. I think we all share this frustration, because I share this frustration that it's that there was an all-party group, it was dormant, I've taken it up, I'm quite often typing like this on my sofa, and then that helps me frame this, because that gives me the foot back into Westminster to say, hi,
it's an important
fashion is the largest part of the creative industries, we make this, we're worth this, but unless we deal with this issues,
Well, it goes back to policy, so I think the fashion industry, as you rightly said, is at this sort of, it's developing and changing rapidly, but I think we need to start engaging with governments, but not
Absolutely.
just governments from Europe, governments across the world, and we have to engage them in, what a sort of a blueprint industry could be.
Well, quite, because if we're the countries that of maybe of the consumer, but we're not arguably we're not anymore, but we're not necessarily the country of the manufacturer. We only have 105, to my understanding, 1,000 manufacturing companies in this country, or members of, so it's tiny. So we have to be navigating. So you've got India, haven't you? You've got Nigeria.
Yeah, so we've got 20. We're reorganising the structure, by the way, now, but we've got 20 fashion councils and fashion weeks, and then we have 250 members.
And I read that Zimbabwe is looking to reapply to enter the Commonwealth as well.
Yeah. So it's the countries that are part of the Commonwealth. Rwanda joined in 2009, so that wasn't part of the British Empire. So any country can actually join it. They align with the core values and principles. It's a sort of circular moving door. Yeah.
Thank you. So after we've spoken to Christina, we're going to do some questions. I met Christina a few weeks ago. She works at the Sustainable Angle. And what I thought was interesting is that you help people access the materials, because sometimes it's really hard to access the materials. I mean, if you're working to the more routine system where you know in the industry, okay, this is the week that they're here, this is the week that you're at Fashion Week, this is the week that you know, it's quite hard to fit in sourcing. And you're almost taking that pain away from somebody because you're providing that.
Exactly. I think I'm going to start at the beginning, how kind of Nina started. Nina wrote a dissertation at the Imperial College, and she interviewed a lot of designer for her dissertation as well, and she realized that there's this like apparent gap between what actually is already available in terms of like organic cotton, but what the fashion designers actually also know. And I think this comes back again to like a question of sustainability in the fashion industry, even while we are not really good with like dealing ethical issues of like human rights abuses, like all Rana Plaza, I mean, has shown this was only 5 years ago. It has always kind of been there, but the detrimental environmental impacts of the industry weren't really that well known. And the thing is, like, while there are these two sides, I mean, there are many more sides to sustainability, but while there are these two sides to sustainability, environmental disasters obviously have a huge impact on lives, on social lives. Again, so if you look at like India, what conventional cotton production does there, farmers losing their entire farms, they're often so devastated that they drink the pesticides which they buy to like buy the cotton because they're coming in such horrible depth, or also like getting cancer. Same with like the production of acrylic fiber. It has shown in various studies that there's this, you know, ever linkage of like the rainforests which get deforested because of our ever growing need of like producing more viscose. And Nina then set up the Sustainable Angle, which is a non-for-profit organization. We worked together. I wasn't back then. I was a volunteer, so I was already there. But Anna, I think, was in that process. She worked together with Charlotte and Nina, and you worked on our environmental criterias. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So with the Center of Sustainable Fashion, so we have very strict environmental criteria. So everything what we showcase has to comply with this criteria. So I think a lot of you have already been at PV or like any sort of other fabric fair. There's a lot of greenwashing going on in the industry, or it's just generally also often so big. And if you even have this ambition goal to like make a collection which is also environmentally sustainable, or at least has a low environmental impact, it's often very difficult to actually really, what you already said, Tamara, before, find these materials. So we kind of like do this work. I'm actually the one who's like, we are like two Nina girls as well, who's going to all the fairs, looking at the materials, in contact with the suppliers, and actually getting these in our studio. And yeah, we organized the Future Fabrics Expo. That's going to be shown at the London Textile Fair, but we also have our really big independent event. Being a non-profit organization, so for us it's really important, it's always within an educational setting. So we do workshops, and also whoever, I don't know if anybody has been at the Future Fabrics Expo, is really about providing the materials, but then also the background information. So on every card you see, okay, this is, I don't know, post-consumer recycled cotton, and it's also out of Tencel. And then why is this fiber better than conventional cotton or viscose in that sort of pack? So it's this whole package.
Do you feel with the way that we're using social media now, and that we're all having conversations and therefore revealing more in a way, therefore seemingly being more transparent, this is also part of why people want to have more transparency in their fabrics, because they want to do a 360 on the identity of themselves?
Yeah, I mean, we see this in like, particularly in the younger generation, which really asks these questions, and it's not good enough for us to like just have no idea that this impact is.
So what kind of brands are coming to you?
I don't know, you name one.
Okay.
Like we have all the big houses coming us. We have M&S, we have John Lewis, we have all this. We have designers. We in Westwood. I don't know. Just name.
And
name a brand.
are you seeing that they want to try to seem to be more sustainable, or they're genuinely looking at this from the angle of at least changing their material supply chain?
I mean, there is a big shift in the last year.
Okay.
Definitely. And there might be, I think there are a lot of designers which have a genuine interest to actually really change. And it also has an economic interest, because the fashion model, the model we're running at the moment, is not sustainable. So if we look at like in 15 years, there's not more land we can grow cotton on.
No.
Like oil is a finite resource. So almost 70% of our fabrics, if you look at the global fiber basket, are made out of synthetic fibers. So it has both.
But it's
angles.
also because I have another lens on. I'm half Turkish, so my family are landowners in Turkey, and they were cotton farmers, and they no longer grow cotton because it's not economically viable. And if they don't grow cotton, neither does the next village or the next village, because that's how it works there. And Turkey was a very large cotton manufacturer. And at the moment, then they went into peanuts, and now I think they're growing watermelons and melons. But it goes in cycles. As a child, it was always cotton. So this would have been the time of year when you were, August and July, it's growing, you pick it in August. So therein, I can see that they obviously don't think that's cost efficient for them, because the price has been drilled down by overconsumption. Exactly. So it comes back to value, and I don't quite know where I'm going with that, but I think it's linked, because if the farmers don't think it's valuable to them, then there's something going on with the pricing.
Yeah, I think we need to rethink our entire fashion model, definitely. I think that the concept of a wardrobe, that you actually have a wardrobe and you just, you add to that and don't always have to buy an entire outfit again and again, is something which probably has been lost in the last years.
I don't know how many people are buying each season. I think that's a miss. I think that's arguably not what's happening. We are... Yeah, I mean, because the influencers and the people that I know who have played the social media game very well are getting it for free. This was free, and I'm not a social influencer, so that was free. So who's buying it? I've never quite understood.
And I think because those large companies have such they're so followed and so watched. Like I know that at Vuitton, I don't know if this is part of my non-disclosure, but they do pretend to things sell out. And they do that with Chanel, they do it with the Birkin bag, things like this, that there's a myth around them that they've invented that doesn't, the scarcity, whereas then in a few months as a staff member you can go and buy it for 90% off in the staff store because you're like, no one wants it.
What the brands are doing though, which is actually quite brilliant, this fast fashion, I don't have anything against fast fashion at all, it's the volume behind fast fashion that I have a lot to complain with. But in fact I think it's amazing because they're going so fast that they're completely killing any possibility of a trend. No, genuinely, trends are not going to be existing anymore. No. Because, a trend that lasts 2 weeks, poof, and then dies, meaning that we will have the freedom to buy trendlessly.
Yes.
So that will also be a way to enter an industry where we buy value, where we buy what is right for us. But they're doing it all unto themselves, which is actually wonderful to watch. They're literally digging their own grave and gently start walking down it. But it is, check it out. How micro little trend, they're going to be all gone soon.
No, I agree with you. I mean, my mother's from the 60s, was young in the 60s, where there was the haircut and there was the dress, and you had to wear a mini dress, whatever your size, and that's no longer...
It's like going on a bus and watching people, that's as long as things last in terms of trend. Yeah. But I actually think that's brilliant.
Because it creates it allows for individuals.
Because if they're all merged onto each other, then we can't really call them trends anymore. And if we can't call things trends, then surely we've got to go back to classics or what's actually right for you, but it's not a trend. It's yours. Or, the redefinition of luxury, I think it's, we could probably be sitting here until... My grandmother used to say that the real luxury was a drop of blood on a hemline. because that meant that a human had made it, and sort of how did this expert, seamstress get it, made a mistake. But yeah, I mean, luxury does need to be redefined.
So has anyone got any questions for these people? Always amazing people on sound. Any questions that anyone's got? I know what I think luxury isn't, and that's somebody working in unsafe conditions for lower than the living wage. That for me is very clearly not what luxury is. So I mean, that's my point. Yeah, Charlotte. Thank you.
I have two questions, one based on your last few comments. I just wanted to have everybody thank you. It sounds like you guys are doing really good work. But I also want to ask a question to you and what you're doing in terms of where you come from power and privilege. How has your mindset changed when working with people of other and color? And then also, your work is very good, but why haven't you brought any people of other or color
Maybe
to represent your cause? Because you're fighting for us, but I still see you.
I mean, I think so a couple of months ago I did an event for an initiative that I run in the Houses of Parliament called Glass Ceiling, Not Glass Slipper, and we had the lady Alexis, and I've forgotten her surname, who's been heading up the campaign against Save the Children. And in the aid and the charity sector, there's been a top-down issue. So there's been a situation which I was totally unaware of when I was giving money to Oxfam or to Save the Children or to whoever, thinking I was doing the right thing, that actually what it was inculcating was a system where there was a lot of abuses of privilege. And I think that now what's happening is people are becoming more aware of that. Alexis has run a very strong campaign. The men that she wanted to resign have resigned. She's yet to have a full apology from the former CEO of Save the Children, but she has started to change the narrative. And what you're seeing then is grassroots activism coming in. So Ursula started with grassroots, and it's become a global phenomenon. I have had a problem finding people of different backgrounds to come to speak here. It's not for want of trying.
But my question is to you individually. When you deal with people of color, coming from your position of privilege and power, how have you changed in your mind on how you deal with people?
Well, I wasn't powerful until really quite recently, and I don't know that I would ever describe myself as powerful. And I have changed my mind hugely, in the sense that, when I see supply chain workers being abused, it obviously is what spanned fashion revolution in the first place. It was the death of people that had been abused in the supply chain.
But I think my question is personal. It's personal. When you walk out on the street, how do you treat people?
I don't think I need to answer this question. Sorry. Yes.
I've been working in luxury for 22 years. As you can see, I'm a woman of colour.
Yeah.
I don't think we should ask people just because they're not of colour what it's like to be of privilege. I consider myself of privilege, and my privilege is to work in luxury and to work a job that I love. I think it's a huge responsibility to ask our gracious panel today, to ask them personally what they think of it. That's a huge question and a huge responsibility, and the job belongs to the person who fits the criteria and is going to do the best job regardless of their colour. And I think we have to be very careful about associating people of colour with non-privileged, because I'm extremely privileged to be black.
That's interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you. You and First
of all, thank you so much. It was a really, really interesting discussion. My background is completely policy, internationally, emerging markets, and I'm currently spending my time at a very large business lobby organisation.
Well, I need to talk to you then, because maybe you...
and I'm also developing a fashion technology app that is aiming to connect sustainable and stylish brands to millennial shoppers. So this has been my playground, so thank you. My question is actually around kind of broader geopolitics globally. We actually touched on it briefly, but I'm wondering how much you're engaging with the UN. So I worked a lot with the UN Global Compact in previous years, and they've been a really excellent platform for not just UK businesses, but also, I actually introduced the first Sierra Leonean business to UN Global Compact. I just wondered if you had any plans to perhaps use that as an actual geopolitical platform to really lobby, not just nationally, but really bring it together, because you're already doing that really well.
So, Fashion Roundtable is 6 months and 2 days old.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm still counting. And it came out of a passion project of mine, essentially, and then it's gained momentum and more and more. Esther used to work at the UN, who's based in Brussels. When I started, it was very Brexit heavy because it needed to have an advocacy platform from an industry that makes so much money for the country. And I'm willing to join the dots. And I've emailed this person, that person, the other person, and some have been responsive. There's an organisation in Brussels that haven't, MAD Brussels haven't replied once. But organisations like that, definitely, it's just been time. For me, it's been time because there aren't quite enough hours in the day, and I am very good at stretching time. It's like there are typos, and I thought I'd left Christina off, and then I reread it, and I hadn't, and I was like, But I was reading up while listening to something about intellectual property with all these people. I'm a stylist. Did I ever think I'd be in a room this morning after doing the school run with a group of people talking about intellectual property? Not in my life. Because it will impact our industry if we don't sort out the customs union and the trade agreements for this country once we leave the EU. So these are the kind of things that I'm trying to cover all the time. So there are going to be gaps because we're only 6 months and 2 days old, but I definitely think that we should talk after, because policy and politics, I had no idea that I thought I lived in a world of independent creative free will because I live here and it's all so free. And then I went to Westminster and it was a wake-up call on how many people are deciding, a group of few people are deciding stuff, and if they're being lobbied and taken for dinner and engaging with lobbyists from other businesses, then their voice, that's why you've heard about fishing, that's why you hear about cars all the time. The business in the UK alone makes more than the car industry for the UK. We make over 10 times what fishing makes. These are what you'll hear, and once you start to hear it, you'll be like, oh, there it goes again. And it's because they've been very good at doing the work, so I think we should definitely connect.
But the Commonwealth, sorry.
Yeah.
We talked to the UN. We have been for a few years, but it's speeding up, it's gathering momentum, but it's with them being so big.
It takes time, doesn't it?
It takes a long time, but we have been in conversations with them for the last 3 years.
And the Commonwealth obviously aligns like their core values and principles a lot with the United Nations, and the Commonwealth has actually got a division in New York. So we're in good communication with them through our accreditation and holding and engaging with governments, but because it's quite a fundamental element of the Commonwealth accreditation. I keep on going on about Commonwealth accreditation.
Yeah, you do, and I never know
But the important thing about the accreditation is that, engagement with government and making them part of our programmes and building those relationships over a number of years, and then starting slowly to hold them to account.
Sorry, and you had a question?
Yeah, it's not fashion revolution. I just wanted to ask, what made fashion revolution grow so much, and what were the things that your team did to make it build momentum?
The magic.
Because I feel like there's been a lot of catastrophes in the world, but somehow they haven't had such huge change in momentum. So what is it that we can learn from you?
I have no idea. Genuinely, I actually think that what made it grow was the fact that we didn't know what we were doing. And if we'd known what we were going to be doing, we wouldn't have done it. If I'd known what this would have become, I would have been so scared of the exposure and everything else. I would have been hiding underneath my bed. But because we didn't know, we had no idea that we were going to be so huge. We just went for it for the love of it. And then Mel joined. She was the first country coordinator, and we thought, yeah, cool, we're going to be in England, and we're going to be in Australia. So I might grab an Italian, I'm sure, at some point. And then by year one, we were in 62 countries by the day we started, and it keeps growing. And I have an inkling that it's something to do with spontaneity and honest, and potentially we are the one organization that's not been bought. We say what we want to say, and we've made that very clear to the brands and to the consumers and to the governments. We're quite honest. And I think that this attracts people because we're honest both ways. And the other one is that, you know, for the first time, I tend to be a little bit ahead of time. You know, I started an upcycling label in the late 90s, but this time we were just right. You know, everything we discussed was ready to be discussed. And I guess what did make us different was the fact that we called ourselves Fashion Revolution, meaning that we speak a language of fashion. We come from the fashion industry, we understand the fashion industry, and we love fashion rather than hate it. And so if you love it, people identify with that sense of really wanting to do something for it, because ultimately you're in it for the love and not for the hate.
Okay, yeah.
I want to ask a question to you, and especially to you. How are you going to persuade these luxury groups to like make their collections smaller? I mean, for instance, I happen to know that a lot of the collections, the cruise collections, you're talking about, they've got about 240, 250 SKUs. Do you know what I mean? That's ridiculous. Yeah. It's absolutely ridiculous. Apart from the fact that most of it won't go into production anyway, but it's still, it's too big. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? These collections are getting big. And the problem is they're looking at things like Gucci, who's showing the bigger profits. Do you know what I mean? And their collections get bigger and bigger and bigger, as you saw in the last collection. And so people are kind of copying them because everybody's looking for, let's be honest, everybody's looking for profits. Yeah. That's what they want. I mean, that's exactly what they want. That's all they care about, to be really honest with you. So how are you going to persuade them to make these collections smaller?
I guess for me, it's like my knowledge of it.
You know, that's when you talk to shops, everybody wants so many drops. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Because people, you know, they live in areas and then they go into that area and then maybe they live somewhere else, because we're talking about very rich people. So that they go into an area, let's say they live around Mount Street, and they look at those shops in Mount Street that month, and then when they come back the following month, they want a different drop. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, no, totally. Because we kind of had to keep up with that as part of designing there. You keep up with that. For me, I feel like because these cruise and resort collections have always existed, they just kind of gone into the store as things that, you know, they just got huge. And I feel like that's their way of, for me, I think they were starting to become quite big as I was leaving. And with Nicolas, when he took over, it became more of a thing, you know, they flew everyone out. But that's like their marketing ploy to distract people from, I think, what's actually happening. And for me, if as a young designer, you've kind of felt like you're so lucky to be in one of those companies, you know, like you're blessed. And I was like, I'm actually not that blessed. I've got like a double first. You're lucky to have me, you know? And that's like sometimes, I think it's changing the attitude of people to feel like we don't need to be in those positions, you know, and what we can actually do is very little, because with the Parisian groups, they've invented these narratives of history for themselves, like with Dior, and, you know, no one talks about how the new look was not new, or, you know, and when you bring that up, you're just silenced, and they know, like, and even with, you know, everyone that's involved in the industry, it's the businessmen that control it, and the only thing they care about is profit, and it's really, that's kind of why I left, because I just thought, you can't design anything really that you want to, and even, like with Vuitton, it's not a fashion house, you know, they made, like, luggage. How they turned that around is, in a way, it's genius, but it's like a really sinister kind of genius. So I'm not sure how I think that the change comes from consumers, because I think there's... No? Sorry. I don't know, but I think it's like a thought, like it's a way of thinking that needs to change.
I think it's holding hands. I think we make a mistake if we start thinking the change comes from policymakers, from designers, from consumers. This is the first thing that needs to be understood, is that the first principle of anything sustainable is that we have to cooperate. Yeah. So the change is going to come from all of us. But I think that the change is going to come when we stop seeing that non-creatives can 100% run creative companies. So I think that the issue of having business people really working on what is a creative soul and a creative instinct is already something that's...
It doesn't work,
you know? But I have to say, I am, you know, and it's the same with sustainability. You can't just talk to fashion students. You have to talk to fashion students, media students, business students, chemistry, geography, because it's a big thing. Fashion has how many industries from when we plant the cotton seed until, you know, So you talk to all of them, but it is a question of working together and starting the conversation, which it started right now with bells on. But I think that the new generations that are coming out of college right now, the next CEOs are going to have a completely different attitude to return of investment.
Yeah.
You know, return of investment will mean that the people will have to be paid to waste. You know, they will see waste as a resource because we will be mining for plastic in 5 years' time, 10 years' time.
I guess,
so
like,
it's all together.
Yeah, and when those men kind of discover, like, it is usually like white men that own those companies. Yeah, when they discover it's profitable and that we're like, we as designers, we never buy fashion. You know, like, we never go out and buy fashion. We just like wait for a charity shop or sample sale, and you're just like, oh, I'll just, yeah, literally, because you go, yeah.
Because they're the one presenting it to the consumer. So if the retailers are taking all of
It's very industry wide.
But I also think that Camilla's hit on a point, and that actually, if we take what we're doing here, I saw that there was an event on in Annabelle's 2 nights ago, and it was a man leading a talk about female empowerment, and I was like, okay, that's interesting. But then I also thought about it. And I thought, well, maybe I should be taking this to Annabelle's, and I've actually said that to Charlotte. You know, maybe we need to be hitting though, because those consumers have every right to consume. You know, I think as you know, through the lens of respect, and I agree, and that's why this is a roundtable, because we have to create an open dialogue between all sections, and that's been missing, I think. But if we take this to the Soho houses and the Shoreditch houses and those consumers who have every right to want to be excited by their shop, you know, are engaged in the conversation and they're not excluded, I think it's important to have it at all levels.
And we need to take it to Streatham, and we need to take it to the state school where my daughters go around the corner. I mean, again, it's not about isolating, it's about uniting.
Yeah.
You know, it's, you know, we share the planet. It's not mine or for the people who live in Soho House.
But it's also relatively new, isn't it? That, I mean, it's in the last generation that you expected a drop this quickly. I'm sure it wasn't like this when I started in the early 90s. Sure, yeah. So this is the newer model, so it could shift again.
Even 90 looks, that's like a new thing for shows. Like Chanel did like 150 looks. You know, who are those people? It's bizarre, and I do think it's like a marketing thing, and maybe it's out of those CEOs are shitting themselves because they know they can look through, I don't know, social media or whatever and access the same information that we do as young people, and they understand that the way we're going to consume and do consume is completely different and miles. And I work with a lot of these art women as private clients, and listening to them being like, I'm not going into Vuitton to buy like a hard leather dress for £4,000 when it's very easy and open to open up a dialogue with a young designer because we're just like an email away or, you know, Instagram message away. Someone in my team will get it and I'll be like, oh yeah, I'd love to work with her, she's amazing. And that's, I think this is like, this is the point where everything kind of changes, and hopefully the luxury.
Because your price point probably isn't that different to going to one of those bigger brands, but actually they know that they could go to a woman who's buying at that level, her friends will be buying at that level as well. So what you're almost doing is going back to couture.
Yeah, in like I think, and that's kind of what I think has been missing for fashion for a really long time, is that connection between the people who design and make clothes and the women that wear them, and it completely changes the way that I design. Yeah, and that's like what the kind of dream of fashion is kind of built on. Then you go into Dior and you can buy a Miss Dior perfume. You know, it's not the same thing at all.
People want to tell stories now about what they're wearing.
Yeah,
and that's been driven a lot again. You know, retail again. They want to hear the story, and they want the storytelling, like you've said.
Yeah.
Of, you know, how you talk about your weaver and things like that. And and people are more comfortable wearing those luxury clothes because they can tell the story about it and where it's from and how it's sourced and made it. And retailers are starting to recognise that, definitely.
Yeah, I definitely also want to take this to Selfridges.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think we have to have lots of conversations. Sorry, but you're part of my gang.
Yeah. But we also get so much like pressure from stores. We work on the same drops as like Louis Vuitton and Chanel. We're like, how do you expect us to be at that? Even like when we get, you know, Vogue runway reviews, they're reviewed alongside Prada. And you're like, how can you even? I'm like one person in the studio at Seven Sisters making 30 looks in 2 weeks probably, and they're like 17 designers, 500 interns making a couple of looks. You know, it's just bonkers.
Yeah, so it's a grading system. And I know you've got a question.
Yeah. What you said earlier really touched me because I studied Chinese business and management, but my passion has always been fashion. I've lived in China, Uganda, and what I saw there has made me come here because of how people are working in those conditions and everything. And I guess my question is really, how would someone like myself get into the industry? Because a lot of people don't really take me seriously because of maybe my educational background, but I do have a passion for it. So how would I be able to...
As in have a brand? What, making clothes?
As in getting involved.
But you see, you speak languages that are an asset to any brand.
Yeah.
You've already got an understanding because not everybody needs to be the designer. You've got languages and therefore you've got a skill set. You know, like there are accountants. I was in a room full of people talking about IP this morning. You know, trust me, I never thought about that before 2 years ago. There are so many jobs that actually are integral to the business that, you know, we could... You know, any of us could have a chat with you about options.
But the fashion industry is the one industry that really doesn't value teamwork at all. I mean, we don't value our workers because we don't know who they are and where they are. They're completely secret, but we don't value the team either. I mean, you know, you go and watch a film and at the end you'll have the credits, and in those credits you will actually thank the engineers and, you know, everybody's show me a lookbook that tells you who the seamsters are. Name and surname, thank you very much, you know. We don't do that. Fashion is only, it's Karl Lagerfeld, or it's, you know, we call Prada, you know, and we don't think that it is like that, you know. The real fashion is one person with 13, you know, and so, you know, get in there because, you know, it's really about the value that each person brings to a teamwork of people, and when we will start to understand that. You know, I will be speaking to students and they won't all want to be a designer, and I won't have to break their heart because sometimes I have to tell them, sorry, you're just not good enough for that, but you're a brilliant pattern cutter. And for me, that's a compliment. But, you know, for them, it's, you know, a dream being broken. So again, that too is important, that we see that, you know, everything is made of people. Brands are made of people. Teams are made of people, and each person has an equal value in that story, and you know, and you could be languages or traveling or just your, you know, your passion.
I mean, there's an event going on today and tomorrow called Make It British, and there is a manufacturer that's not far from here called Fashion Enter.
Oh yeah,
Jenny's involved in, so she couldn't be here today. There is a need for manufacturing in this country, arguably. Whether or not that becomes the place where you do the sampling and then you go to a second or third party to, you know, but there's lots of opportunities.
They train as well. They do those.
Yeah. So there's lots of opportunities that are not always at the, you know, the rah-rah level, but you know, there's also not enough jobs, and as we've already discussed, you know, there's issues around that. So I'm all for inclusivity. That's why I said this.
I agree, it's hard to find the information, right? Yeah, especially in this particular field.
Everything's like hidden from everyone.
Have you tried CO, Common Objective?
Yeah, Common Objective are amazing.
So it's an online platform that connects pretty much everybody to everybody else. And so
Tamsin spoke at our Commonwealth event last week.
Snoop. Go on to CO, Snoop, see what's going on, and also find what you really want to do. You know, in which bit of that team do you think that you'd have?
And it might shift. I've met photographers who were hairdressers. You know, models now are doing, you know, Instagram photography, campaigning. You know, that I'm now doing this. I was a stylist. You know, there are lots of different opportunities, and therefore, you know, I don't think it's quite so singular. So that's, you know, you just have to go to where your heart leads you, but also find out about it, which is why it's easier now. I didn't even know what a stylist was. In fact, someone was one. It was assisting in French Vogue, and I thought, that's what I want to do. That's how I fell into it. Sorry, you've got a question. Has anyone else got another question before we go back to this lady? Did you have your hand up, Rebecca?
Do you know what? I've actually probably forgotten. But in actual fact, it was something to do with age, which is relevant to having forgotten it. Because like, you kind of mentioned how young people are much more engaged in sustainability. And one of the issues that I'm trying to really bring out is actually having this conversation with an older generation.
I agree.
And, you know, both in the print magazine and also in the online platform that I've got, this intergenerational idea, and actually saying, you know, showing that there's just actually a very natural way of still having a relationship with fashion and with clothes, as you say, something we all actually converge with. And so I guess the question I was going to ask was, so how do we connect those two areas up? How do we connect these ideas that perhaps are becoming much more natural to a younger generation? How do we get those across to a generation that are perhaps more used to consuming on a different scale?
I think mentorship is quite big there. I think that idea of mentorship.
But almost like an opposite mentorship.
Exactly, yeah, like sort of peer-to-peer mentorship really, which does highlight the, you know, someone might be a lot older but have a sort of speciality with a particular craft that a younger person doesn't really understand that much, but still having that amazing gatekeeper could excel that particular youngster into a number of particular fields. So I think that's how that connection can be taught.
I think you've hit on a point, Rebecca, because you're very kind. So Rebecca does a magazine that's just launched, a print magazine called Goldie. And she very kindly sent a copy to my very glam mother, who's an ex-rocker and is a consumer of fashion, and looks at me when she says I've got a bargain, and I'm like, oh mum, you know someone's making, like, she won't even tell me anymore. And I think that, you know, that this baby boomer generation are going to be around for a very long time. They have gone through many cultural revolutions, feminism and the sexual revolution, and they are financially possibly more wealthy than younger generations. So I definitely think there's something to be had about bridging this conversation up as well as down.
It's got to cross both areas, and can produce such interesting conversations and dialogues when you can engage that generational aspect. And you know, in the magazine, my big fashion platform in the magazine is to only talk about sustainable fashion, and you know, to bring that idea to a generation who are just used to, and you know, but it's a glossy magazine. These people are used to going to Selfridges with their friends to shop. Yeah. And I'm trying to challenge that within that platform. But these are all different conversations that.
But I also think the way, I mean, that this is going off piste a bit, but I think the way that we shop will be different, because I think we'll be going for experiences rather than for shopping, and so that we will still be enjoying. You know, if I was the CEO of M&S, I would be dealing with that differently from the way they are dealing with it at the moment, and I would be making that shop more experiential. If I was that consumer, that would be the narrative. I chaired a talk for fashion assistants last night, and they were all talking about the glossy market, but what they'd missed is that the market, you're the print market era, your generation of the print market era, and they were focusing on their generation. I was like, yeah, but your business model's dying out. What are you going to do? How are you going to be the CEO? You're focusing on being an editor. You know, I don't even know what the trajectory of that is in the next 20 years, because it has to shift.
Yeah, and I think the power of any kind of media, in that digital or in that, I work in a much more digital print. We haven't really talked about that at all tonight, about the impact of that on sustainability and on the circular economy, and how the responsibility I have to start opening those questions up to my audience.
Well, maybe it's about asking some of the panel here to write articles for you, or engaging with your audience.
But like narratives of sustainability are hugely interesting, and how the sort of like relationship between the media and fashion, I think, is neglected in discussions of sustainability, because we talk about production and supply chains and all of that, and drops by luxury brands and on the high street and everything, but someone's communicating that and putting it out there as well. So that's
I work with the journalism at CSM and the communicators as much as I do with the fashion. There is no point in having an amazing, amazingly designed collection with solutions and innovation, which then gets described as eco-friendly. I mean, how does that kill it? But that's what I was saying. You have to talk to geographers and chemists, and we can't. We are using fashion as our vehicle because obviously that's what we're all into. But every single facet of the fashion industry has to be on the same page.
Yeah, I've been talking with the sort of like communication students at LCF about communicating sustainability not through a consumerist lens. So it's not about anything to do with this sustainable garment or this thing that you could have. It's actually about what you've already got, but it's very difficult to put that in a magazine because it's. So how do you tell those stories?
This is my big issue.
But then that's
at the moment
when I
talk to other editors and they say, oh, but. I say, actually, you're just talking out bollocks. You're not actually being lazy thinking. We need to come up with this.
Is it the advertiser problem?
Yes, the
advertisers. Yeah.
But educators, so I was at I just come back from this summit in Copenhagen. And I was at the Educators Roundtable, and we actually discussed the possibility of beginning to teach, deconstructing as much as deconsuming. So, it is, again, I think, language is incredibly important, and we have to make sustainable language pertinent, relevant, and gritty. A few years ago, no one talked about the supply chain. Now you go into the supermarket and people talk about supply chain. By that same token, I want people to understand about unionization, collective bargaining. If you don't know it, Google it. But we can't simplify. This is why I've never used the word sustainable fashion or ethical fashion. I call it fashion, and everything else potentially is unsustainable. But the way that we use our words is important. And every thread of communication is then communicated with those words. So of course, I agree with you, it has to be part of the education as well.
That's also just one thing why our collection is not called the Sustainable Fabric Collection, it's called the Future Fabrics Expo.
Yeah.
Because we also want to communicate this is the future, this is not an add-on, this is what it should be, just generally. We sometimes obviously use the word sustainable because it's just so easy to explain certain things, but it always has to be in context. And I think a large part of our work is also really showcasing that fabrics they don't have to come with a certain design print. If you do something sustainable, it doesn't have to look ethical or whatever. It can.
And that's the other thing. I could go on for an hour. But when people say, ethical fashion, it shouldn't be about hemp. It should be sexy. Turn it around. It should be about hemp. And it shouldn't be sexy. We got into trouble with sexy. Sexy is the most overrated, it's exploitation. Sorry, that's a whole other thing. Let's talk about language. I mean, hemp is like a world savior, and we give it a bad name.
But some people misuse the word sexy. Some people misuse the word sexy. They might just feeling good.
It's a bit of a...
Absolutely, but they misuse the word sexy because, we are meant to be antagonizing. Desirable is better than sexy.
I've been really aware that the clock that I was using hasn't worked, so I've done this all by guesswork, and I know that we're at the end, but I know you've got one question and then we're going to have to end it there. So what was your question, Donna?
So my question is, how do we take this conversation outside the parameters? Culturally, we all understand what you're doing, and we absolutely salute.
Thank you.
A lot of for example, like I said, I work in the luxury market, and I emphasize that my belief has always been 22 years sustainable luxury. And I'm met with a lot of people that say, we can't do sustainability and luxury. And I think, well, it started off as made to measure, so that's luxury, that's how it should be. But a lot of the Gucci, a lot of the LVMH, which I agree with you is the bank, it's not really a fashion house, is bought by overseas customers, people who are not culturally educated. They don't have the privilege of people like you telling them. Last week I was in Dubai doing a buying event, and it was a sustainable fashion day. It's 47 degrees in Dubai, so they had it outdoors with air conditioning. Can you imagine how much electricity they needed to cool all the people for them to come off their Range Rovers and eat their organic
sushi?
Yeah, exactly. The whole thing was nuts. And then and I was saying to them in Arabic, can I help you and how can you help us take this? Because the people buying from Selfridges and Harrods, mostly unfortunately now not really. Yeah, exactly.
There are big changes in China and India that I can tell you from my fashion revolution point of view. So in China you have the biggest renting company, it's called Y Closet, it's enormous. And in China the people are wearing clothes that have any kind of second-hand or pass-me-down type association. It's absolutely culture changing because it is considered bad luck to wear clothes that have been worn by other people. So this is a massive cultural shift. Y Closet, the biggest rental service, I think, in the world. And also, you know, you've seen things like in Hong Kong, 2 charity shops, second-hand clothes stores have opened recently. In India, Lakme Fashion Week, the Sustainable Day, was the day that was most followed by the press. And, you know, this year, Fashion Revolution, some of our biggest articles were in daily newspapers, you know, again in India. So I think it's a little bit presumptuous to think that we, you know, because we understand, so we understand how to buy. In China and in India, they see the exploitation, they see the production. You know, we've just read that people are paid £3 in Leicester. Yeah. And in fact, some of the best factories I've seen or I've heard of are in producing countries. So it's also about us. We need to rewire our system and think, you know, potentially there is interest in other countries. I really don't know about Dubai, but definitely for you know, producing countries such as China and India, they seem to be, the consumer seems to be very, very engaged with this conversation. I'm really sorry, but I have to go.
It's okay. I was going to give you a lift.
No, I know, but I think you're going to have to unravel and everything. So.
Okay, so I want to say thank you very much. I'll be here for a minute. We've got elderflower cordial that my